The Purple Emperor watched me in silence. I cast again, spinning out 6 feet more of waterproof silk, and as the line hissed through the air far across the pool, I saw my 3 flies fall on the water like drifting thistledown. The Purple Emperor sneered. "You see," he said, "I am right. There is not a trout in Brittany that will rise to a tailed fly." "They do in America," I replied.
"Zoot for America!"
observed the Purple Emperor. "And trout take a tailed fly in England," I insisted sharply. "Now do I care what things or people do in England?" Demanded the Purple Emperor. "You don't care for anything except yourself and your wriggling caterpillars," I said, more annoyed than I had yet been. The Purple Emperor sniffed. His broad, hairless, sunburnt features bore that obstinate expression which always irritated me. Perhaps the manner in which he wore his hat intensified the irritation, for the flapping brim rested on both ears, and the 2 little velvet ribbons, which hung from the silver buckle in front, wiggled and fluttered with every trivial breeze. His cunning eyes and sharp-pointed nose were out of all keeping with his fat red face. When he met my eye, he chuckled. "I know more about insects than any man in Morbihan, or Finisterre, either for that matter," he said. "The Red Admiral knows as much as you do," I retorted. "He doesn't," replied the Purple Emperor angrily, "and his collection of butterflies is twice as large as yours," I added, moving down the stream to a spot directly opposite him. "It is it?" sneered the Purple Emperor. "Well, let me tell you, Miss Ubarl, in all his collection he hasn't a specimen, a single specimen, of that magnificent butterfly, Apatura iris, commonly known as the Purple Emperor." "Everybody in Brittany knows that," I said, casting across the sparkling water. "But just because you happen to be the only man who ever captured a Purple Emperor in Morbihan, it doesn't follow that you are an authority on sea trout flies. Why do you say that a Breton sea trout won't touch a tailed fly?" "It's so," he replied. "Why, there are plenty of mayflies about the stream." "Let them fly," snarled the Purple Emperor. "You won't see a trout touch him?" My arm was aching, but I grasped my split bamboo more firmly, and half-turning waded out into the stream, and began to whip the ripples at the head of the pool. A great green dragonfly came drifting by on the summer breeze and hung a moment above the pool, glittering like an emerald. "There's a chance! Where is your butterfly net?" I called across the stream. "What for? That dragonfly? I've got dozens. An axe genius, dreary characteristic anal angle of posterior wings, in male round thorax marked with—" "That will do," I said fiercely. "Can't I point out an insect in the air without this burst of erudition? Can you tell me, in simple everyday French, what this little fly is, this one flitting over the eelgrass here beside me? See, it has fallen on the water." "Huh," sneered the Purple Emperor. "That's a Lanobia annulus." "What's that?" I demanded. Before he could answer, there came a heavy splash in the pool, and the fly disappeared. "He," tittered the Purple Emperor. "Didn't I tell you the fish knew their business? That was a sea trout. I hope you don't get him." He gathered up his butterfly net, collecting box, chloroform bottle, and cyanide jar. Then he rose, swung the box over his shoulder, stuffed the poisoned bottles into the pockets of his silver-buttoned velvet coat, and lighted his pipe. This latter operation was a demoralizing spectacle for the Purple Emperor. Like all Breton peasants, smoked one of those microscopic Breton pipes which requires 10 minutes to find, 10 minutes to fill, 10 minutes to light, and 10 seconds to finish. With true Breton's delidity, he went through this solemn rite, blew 3 puffs of smoke into the air, scratched his pointed nose reflectively, and waddled away, calling back an ironical
"Au revoir, and bad luck to all Yankees."
I watched him out of sight, thinking sadly of the young girl whose life he made a hell upon earth, Liz Trevik, his niece. She never admitted it, but we all knew what the black and blue marks meant on her soft, round arm, and it made me sick to see the look of fear come into her eyes, when the Purple Emperor waddled into the Café of the Grain. It was commonly said that he half-starved her. This she denied. Mary Joseph and fine Lillicar had seen him strike her the day after the pardon of the birds because she had liberated 3 bullfinches which he had lined the day before. I asked Lise if this were true, and she refused to speak to me for the rest of the week. There was nothing to do about it. If the Purple Emperor had not been avaricious, I should never have seen Lise at all, but he could not resist the 30 francs a week which I offered him. And Lise posed for me all day long, happy as a linnet in a pink thorn hedge. Nevertheless, the Purple Emperor hated me and constantly threatened to send Lise back to her dreary flax spinning. He was suspicious too, and when he had gulped down the single glass of cider which proves fatal to the sobriety of most Bretons, he would pound the long, discolored oaken table and roar curses on me, on Eve Terech, and on the Red Admiral. We were the 3 objects in the world which he most hated: me because I was a foreigner and didn't care a rap for him and his butterflies, and the Red Admiral because he was a rival entomologist. He had other reasons for hating Terech. The Red Admiral, a little wizened wretch with a badly adjusted glass eye and a passion for brandy, took his name from a butterfly which predominated in his collection. This butterfly, commonly known to amateurs as the Red Admiral and to entomologists as Vanessa Atalanta, had been the occasion of scandal among the entomologists of France and Brittany. For the Red Admiral had taken one of these common insects, dyed it a brilliant yellow by the aid of chemicals, and palmed it off on a credulous collector as a South African species, absolutely unique. The 50 francs which he gained by this rascality were, however, absorbed in a suit for damages brought by the outraged amateur a month later, and when he had sat in the Quimperle jail for a month, he reappeared in the little village of St. Gilles, soured, thirsty, and burning for revenge. Of course we named him the Red Admiral, and he accepted the name with suppressed fury. The Purple Emperor, on the other hand, had gained his imperial title legitimately, for it was an undisputed fact that the only specimen of that beautiful butterfly, Apatura iris, or the Purple Emperor, as it is called by amateurs, the only specimen that had ever been taken in Finisterre or in Morbihan, was captured and brought home alive by Joseph Marie Glowanek, ever afterward to be known as the Purple Emperor. When the capture of this rare butterfly became known, the Red Admiral nearly went crazy. Every day for a week, he trotted over to the Gua Inn, where the Purple Emperor lived with his niece, and brought his microscope to bear on the rare, newly captured butterfly in hopes of detecting a fraud. But this specimen was genuine, and he leered through his microscope in vain. "No chemicals there, Admiral," grinned the Purple Emperor, and the Red Admiral chatted with rage. To the scientific world of Brittany and France, the capture of an Apatura iris in Morbihan was of great importance. The Museum of Quimper offered to purchase the butterfly, but the Purple Emperor, though a hoarder of gold, was a monomaniac on butterflies, and he jeered at the curator of the museum. From all parts of Brittany and France, letters of inquiry and congratulation poured in upon him. The French Academy of Sciences awarded him a prize, and the Paris Entomological Society made him an honorary member. Being a Breton peasant, and a more than commonly pig-headed one at that, these honors did not disturb his equanimity. But when the little hamlet of St. Gilders elected him mayor, and as is the custom in Brittany under such circumstances, he left his thatched house to take up an official life in the little Groy Inn, his head became completely turned. To be mayor in a village of nearly 150 people, it was an empire. So he became unbearable, drinking himself viciously drunk every night of his life, maltreating his niece, Lise Trevik, like the barbarous old wretch that he was, and driving the Red Admiral nearly frantic with his eternal harping on the capture of Apatura iris. Of course, he refused to tell where he had caught the butterfly. The Red Admiral stalked his footsteps, but in vain.
He,
nagged the Purple Emperor, cuddling his chin over a glass of cider. "I saw you sneaking about the St. Gilder spinney yesterday morning. So you think you can find another Apatura iris by running after me? It won't do, Admiral. It won't do, do you see? The Red Admiral turned yellow with mortification and envy. But the next day he actually took to his bed, for the Purple Emperor had brought home not a butterfly, but a live chrysalis, which if successfully hatched would become a perfect specimen of the invaluable Apatura iris. This was the last straw. The Red Admiral shut himself up in his little stone cottage, and for weeks now he had been invisible to everybody except fine Lillicard, who carried him a loaf of bread and a mullet or langus every morning. The withdrawal of the Red Admiral from the Society of St. Gilders excited first the derision and finally the suspicion of the Purple Emperor. What deviltry could he be hatching? Was he experimenting with chemicals again, or was he engaged in some deeper plot, the object of which was to discredit the Purple Emperor? Rue, the postman who carried the mail on foot once a day from Banalek, a distance of 15 miles each way, had brought several suspicious letters, bearing English stamps to the Red Admiral, and the next day the Admiral had been observed at his window, grinning up into the sky and rubbing his hands together. A night or two after this apparition, the postman left 2 packages at the Goa Inn for a moment while he ran across the way to drink a glass of cider with me. The Purple Emperor, who was roaming about the cafe, snooping into everything that did not concern him, came upon the packages and examined the postmarks and addresses. One of the packages was square and heavy and felt like a book. The other was also square but very light and felt like a pasteboard box. They were both addressed to the Red Admiral, and they bore English stamps. When Rue, the postman, came back, the Purple Emperor tried to pump him, but the poor little postman knew nothing about the contents of the packages, and after he had taken them around the corner to the cottage of the Red Admiral, the Purple Emperor ordered a glass of cider and deliberately fuddled himself until Lise came in and tearfully supported him to his room. Here he became so abusive and brutal that Lise called to me, and I went and settled the trouble without wasting any words. This also the Purple Emperor remembered, and waited his chance to get even with me. That had happened a week ago, and until today he had not deigned to speak to me. Lise had posed for me all the week, and today, being Saturday and I lazy, we had decided to take a little relaxation. She to visit and gossip with her little black-eyed friend Yvette in the neighboring hamlet of St. Julian, and I to try the appetites of the Breton trout with the contents of my American fly book. I had thrashed the stream very conscientiously for 3 hours, but not a trout had risen to my cast, and I was piqued. I had begun to believe that there were no trout in the St. Gilders stream, and would probably have given up had I not seen the sea trout snap the little fly which the Purple Emperor had named so scientifically. That set me thinking. Probably the Purple Emperor was right, for he certainly was an expert in everything that crawled and wriggled in Brittany. So I matched, from my American fly book, the fly that the sea trout had snapped up, and withdrawing the cast of 3, knotted a new leader to the silk and slipped a fly on the loop. It was a queer fly. It was one of those unnameable experiments which fascinate anglers in sporting stores, and which generally prove utterly useless. Moreover, it was a tailed fly, but of course I easily remedied that with the stroke of my penknife. Then I was all ready, and I stepped out into the hurrying rapids and cast straight as an arrow to the spot where the sea trout had risen. Lightly as a plume, the fly settled on the bosom of the pool. Then came a startling splash, a gleam of silver, and the line tightened from the vibrating rod tip to the shrieking reel. Almost instantly I checked the fish, and as he floundered for a moment, making the water boil along his glittering sides, I sprang to the hank again, for I saw that the fish was a heavy one, and I should probably be in for a long run down the stream. The 5-ounce rod swept in a splendid circle, quivering under the strain. "Oh, for a gaff hook," I cried aloud, for I was now firmly convinced that I had a salmon to deal with, and no sea trout at all. Then as I stood, bringing every ounce to bear on the sulking fish, a slender girl came hurriedly along the opposite bank, calling out to me by name. "Why, Lise," I said, glancing up for a second, "I thought you were at St. Julian with Yvette." "Yvette has gone to Banalik. I went home and found an awful fight going on at the Grawa Inn, and I was so frightened that I came to tell you." The fish dashed off at that moment, carrying all the line my reel held, and I was compelled to follow him at a jump. This, active and graceful as a young deer, in spite of her Pontervern sabos, followed along the opposite bank until the fish settled in a deep pool, shook the line savagely once or twice, and then relapsed into the sulks. "Fight at the Grawa Inn," I called across the water. "What fight?" "Not exactly fight, quavid Lise, but the Red Admiral has come out of his house at last, and he and my uncle are drinking together and disputing about butterflies. I never saw my uncle so angry, and the Red Admiral is sneering and grinning. Oh, it is almost wicked to see such a face." "But, Lise," I said, scarcely able to repress a smile, "your uncle and the Red Admiral are always quarreling and drinking." "I know, oh dear me, but this is different, Monsieur Darrell. The Red Admiral has grown old and fierce since he shut himself up 3 weeks ago, and oh dear! I never saw such a look in my uncle's eyes before. He seemed insane with fury. His eyes, I can't speak of it, and then Tarek came in." "Oh," I said more gravely, "that was unfortunate. What did the Red Admiral say to his son?" Lise sat down on a rock among the ferns and gave me a mutinous glance from her blue eyes. "Yves Tarek, loaf, poacher, and son of Louis-Jean Tarek. Otherwise, the Red Admiral had been kicked out by his father and had also been forbidden the village by the Purple Emperor in his majestic capacity of mayor. Twice the young ruffian had returned, once to rifle the bedroom of the Purple Emperor, an unsuccessful enterprise, and another time to rob his own father. He succeeded in the latter attempt, but was never caught, although he was frequently seen roving about the forests and moors with his gun. He openly menaced the Purple Emperor, vowed that he would marry Lise in spite of all the gendarmes in Campale, and these same gendarmes he led many a long chase through briar-filled swampy. What he did to the Purple Emperor, what he intended to do, disquieted me but little, but I worried over his threat concerning Lise. During the last 3 months, this had bothered me a great deal, for when Lise came to St. Gilder's from the convent, the first thing she captured was my heart. For a long time I had refused to believe that any tie of blood linked this dainty blue-eyed creature with the Purple Emperor. Creature with the Purple Emperor. Although she dressed in the velvet-laced bodice and blue petticoat of Finistère and wore the bewitching white coif of St. Gildas, it seemed like a pretty masquerade. To me she was as sweet and as gently bred as many a maiden of the noble Faubourg who danced with her cousins at a Louis XV fête champet. So when Lise said that Yves Tarek had returned openly to St. Gilder, I felt that I had better be there also. "What did Tarek say, Lys?" I asked, watching the line vibrating above the placid pool. The wild rose color crept into her cheeks. "Oh," she answered with a little toss of her chin. "You know what he always says? That he will carry you away." "Yes, in spite of the Purple Emperor, the Red Admiral, and the gendarmes." "Yes, and what do you say, Lise?" "Oh, nothing." "Then let me say it for you." Lys looked at her delicate, pointed sabots, the sabots from Pontavon made to order. They fitted her little foot. They were her only luxury. "Will you let me answer for you, Lys?" I asked. "You, Miss Yodel?" "Yes. Will you let me give him his answer?" "Mondio, why should you concern yourself, Miss Yodel?" The fish lay very quiet, but the rod in my hand trembled. "Because I love you, Lys." The wild rose color in her cheeks deepened. She gave a gentle gasp, then hid her curly full of head in her hands. "I love you, Lys." "Do you know what you say?" she stammered. "Yes, I love you." She raised her sweet face and looked at me across the pool. "I love you," she said, while the tears stood like stars in her eyes. "Shall I come over the brook to you?" 2. That night Yves Tarek left the village of St. Gildas vowing vengeance against his father who refused him shelter. I can see him now standing in the road, his bare legs rising like pillars of bronze. From his straw-stuffed sabots, his short velvet jacket torn and soiled by exposure and dissipation, and his eyes fierce, roving, bloodshot, while the Red Admiral squeaked curses on him, and hobbled away into his little stone cottage. "I will not forget you," cried Eve Terek, and stretched out his hand toward his father with a terrible gesture. Then he whipped his gun to his cheek and took a short step forward, and I caught him by the throat before he could fire. And a second later we were rolling in the dust of the Banalik Road. I had to hit him a heavy blow behind the ear before he would let go, and then, rising and shaking myself, I dashed his muzzle-loading fowling gun piece to hits against a wall and threw his knife into the river. The Purple Emperor was looking on with a queer light in his eyes. It was plain that he was sorry Terek had not choked me to death. "He would have killed his father," I said, as I passed him, going toward the Groy Inn. "That's his business," snarled the Purple Emperor. There was a deadly light in his eyes. For a moment I thought he was going to attack me, but he was merely viciously drunk, so I shoved a limb out of my way and went to bed, tired and disgusted. The worst of it was I couldn't sleep, for I feared that the Purple Emperor might begin to abuse Lise. I lay restlessly, tossing among the sheets until I could stay there no longer. I did not dress entirely. I merely slipped on a pair of chosens and sabots, a pair of knickerbockers, a jersey, and a cap. Then, loosely tying a handkerchief about my throat, I went down the worm-eaten stairs and out into the moonlit road. There was a candle flaring in the Purple Emperor's window, but I could not see him. "He's probably dead drunk," I thought, and looked up at the window, where 3 years before I had first seen Lise. "Asleep, thank heaven," I muttered, and wandered out along the road. Passing the small cottage of the Red Admiral, I saw that it was dark, but the door was open. I stepped inside the hedge to shut it, thinking in case Eve Terek should be roving about, his father would lose whatever he had left. Then, after fastening the door with a stone, I wandered on through the dazzling Breton moonlight. A nightingale was singing in a willow swamp below, and from the edge of the mirror among the tall swamp grasses, myriads of frogs charted a bass chorus. When I returned, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, and across the meadows on the way cliffs outlined against the paling horizon, I saw a seaweed gatherer going to his work among the curling breakers on the coast. His long rake was balanced on his shoulder, and the sea wind carried his song across the meadows to me. "St. Gildas, St. Gildas, pray for us, shelter us, us who toil in the sea." Passing the shrine at the entrance of the village, I took off my cap and knelt in prayer to Our Lady of Fowey, and if I neglected myself in that prayer, surely I believed Our Lady of Fowey would be kinder to Lise. It is said that the shrine casts white shadows. I looked out, but saw only the moonlight. Then, very peacefully, I went to bed again and was only awakened by the clank of sabers and the trample of horses in the road below my window. Good gracious, I thought, it must be 11 o'clock, for there are the gendarmes from Camp-Ole. I looked at my watch. It was only 8:30, and as the gendarmes made their rounds every Thursday at 11, I wondered what had brought them out so early. Dills. Of course, I grumbled, rubbing my eyes. They are after Terek, and I jumped into my limited bath. Before I was completely dressed, I heard a timid knock, and opening my door, razor in neck, stood astonished and silent. Lise, her blue eyes wide with terror, leaned on the threshold. "My darling," I cried, "what on earth is the matter?" But she only clung to me, panting, like a wounded seagull. At last, when I drew her into the room and raised her face to mine, she spoke in a hut-breaking voice. "Oh, Dick, they are going to arrest you, but I will die before I believe one word of what they say. No, don't ask me," and she began to sob desperately. I found that something really serious was the matter. I flung on my coat and cap and, slipping one arm about her waist, went down the stairs and out into the road. 4 gendarmes sat on their horses in front of the cafe door, beyond them the entire population of St. Gilda's gaped 10 deep. "Hello, Durand," I said to the brigadier. "What the devil is this I hear about arresting me?" "It's true, mon ami," replied Durand with sepulchral sympathy. I looked him over from the tip of his spurred boots to his sulphur-yellow saber belt, then upward, button by button, to his disconcerted face. "What for?" I said scornfully. "Don't try any cheap sleuth work on me. Speak up, man, what's the trouble?" The Purple Emperor, who sat in the doorway staring at me, started to speak, but thought better of it and got up and went into the house. The gendarmes rolled their eyes mysteriously and looked wise. "Come, Durand," I said impatiently. "What's the charge?" "Murder," he said in a faint voice. "What?" I cried incredulously. "Nonsense. Do I look like a murderer? Get off your horse, you stupid, and tell me who's murdered." Durand got down looking very silly and came up to me, offering his hand with a propitiatory grin. It was the Purple Emperor who denounced you. See, they found your handkerchief at his
door.
"Whose door, for heaven's sake?" I cried. "Why, the Red Admiral's. The Red Admiral's. What has he done? Nothing. He's only been murdered." I could scarcely believe my senses, although they took me over to the little stone cottage and pointed out the blood-spattered room. But the horror of the thing was that the corpse of the murdered man had disappeared, and there only remained a nauseating lake of blood on the stone floor, in the center of which lay a human hand. There was no doubt as to whom the hand belonged, for everybody who had ever seen the Red Admiral knew that the shriveled bit of flesh which lay in the thickening blood was the hand of Flut, the Red Admiral. To me it looked like the severed claw of some gigantic bird. "Well," I said, "there's been murder committed. Why don't you do something?" "What?" asked Durand. "I don't know. Send for the commissaire. He's at Kimpel," I telegraphed. "Then send for a doctor and find out how long this blood has been coagulating." "The chemist from Kimpel is here. He's a doctor. What does he say?" "He says that he doesn't know." "And who are you going to arrest?" I inquired, turning away from the spectacle on the floor. "I don't know," said the brigadier solemnly. "You are denounced by the Purple Emperor because he found your handkerchief at the door when he went out this morning." "Just like a pig-headed Breton," I exclaimed, thoroughly angry. "Did he not mention Eve?"
Tarek?
"No, of course not," I said. "He overlooked the fact that Tarek tried to shoot his father last night and that I took away his gun. All that counts for nothing when he finds my handkerchief at the murdered man's door." "Come into the cafe," said Durand, much disturbed. "We can talk it over there. Of course, Mr. Darrell. I have never had the faintest idea that you were the murderer." The 4 gendarmes and I walked across the road to the Grion and entered the cafe. It was crowded with Britons, smoking, drinking, and jabbering in half a dozen dialects, all equally unsatisfactory to a civilized ear, and I pushed through the crowd to where little Max Fortin, the chemist of Kimpel, stood smoking a vile cigar. "This is a bad business," he said, shaking hands and offering me the mate to his cigar, which I politely declined. "Now, Monsieur Fortin," I said, "it appears that the Purple Emperor found my handkerchief near the murdered man's door this morning, and so he concludes," here I glared at the Purple Emperor, "that I am the assassin. I will now ask him a question," and turning on suddenly I shouted, "What were you doing at the Red Admiral's door?" The Purple Emperor started and turned pale, and I pointed at him triumphantly. See what a sudden question will do. Look how embarrassed he is, and yet I do not charge him with murder. And I tell you, gentlemen, that man there knows as well as I do who was the murderer of the Red Admiral." "I don't," called the Purple Emperor. "You do," I said. "It was Eve Tarek." "I don't believe it," he said obstinately, dropping his voice, of course not being pig-headed. "I am not pig-headed," he roared again, "but I am mayor of St. Gilda's, and I do not believe that Eve Terrick killed his father. You saw him try to kill him last night? The mayor grunted. And you saw what I did? He grunted again, and I went on. You heard? Eve Terrick threatened to kill his father. You heard him curse the Red Admiral and swear to kill him. Now the father is murdered, and his body is gone. And your handkerchief? Appeared the Purple Emperor. I dropped it, of course. And the seaweed gatherer who saw you last night lurking about the Red Admiral's cottage, grinned the Purple Emperor. I was startled at the man's malice. That will do, I said. It is perfectly true that I was walking on the Banalek Road last night, and that I stopped to close the Red Admiral's door, which was ajar, although his light was not burning. After that I went up the road to the Denais Woods, and then walked over by St. Julian, whence I saw the seaweed gatherer on the cliffs. He was near enough for me to hear what he sang. What of that? What did you do then? Then I stopped at the shrine and said a prayer, and then I went to bed and slept until Brigadier Duran's gendarmes awoke me with their clatter. Now, Miss Yoderel, said the Purple Emperor, resting a fat finger and shooting a wicked glance at me. Now, Miss Yoderel, which cat did you wear last night on your midnight stroll? Sabots or shoes? I thought a moment. Shoes, no sabots. I just slipped on my show-sons and went out in my sabots. Which was it, shoes or sabots? Snarled the Purple Emperor. Sabots, you fool. Are these your sabots? He asked, lifting up a wooden shoe with my initials cut on the wad. Instep. Yes, I replied. Then how did this blood come on the other one? He shouted, and held up a sabot, the mate to the first, on which a drop of blood had spattered. I haven't the least idea, I said calmly, but my heart was beating very fast, and I was furiously angry. You blockhead, I said, controlling my rage. I'll make you pay for this when they catch Eve Terrick and convict him. Brigadier Duran, do your duty if you think I am under suspicion. Arrest me, but grant me one favor. Put me in the Red Admiral's cottage, and I'll see whether I can't find some clue that you have overlooked. Of course, I won't disturb anything until the commissar arrives. Bah! You all make me very ill. He's hardened, observed the Purple Emperor, wagging his head. What motive had I to kill the Red Admiral? I asked them all scornfully, and they all cried none. Eve Terrick is the bait. Man! Passing out of the door, I swung around and shook my finger at the Purple Emperor. Oh, I'll make you dance for this, my friend, I said, and I followed Brigadier Duran across the street to the cottage of the murdered man. 3. They took me at my word and placed a gendarme with a bared saber at the gateway by the hedge. Give me your parole, said poor Duran, and I will let you go where you wish. But I refused and began prowling about the cottage looking for clues. I found lots of things that some people would have considered most important, such as ashes from the red bodicate, Admiral's pipe, footprints in a dusty vegetable bin, bottles smelling of Polu cider and dust. Oh, lots of dust, but I was not an expert, only a stupid everyday amateur, so I defaced the footprints with my thick shooting boots, and I declined to examine the pipe ashes through a microscope, although the Red Admiral's microscope stood on the table close at hand. At last I found what I had been looking for, some long wisps of straw curiously depressed and flattened in the middle, and I was certain I had found the evidence that would settle Eve Terrick for the rest of his life. It was plain as the nose on your face. The straws were sabbath straws, flattened where the foot had pressed them, and sticking straight out, where they projected beyond the sabbaths. Now nobody in St. Gildas used straw in sabbats, except a fisherman who lived near St. Julian, and the straw in his sabbats was ordinary, yellow wheat straw. This straw, or rather these straws, were from the stalks of the red wheat which only grows inland, and which everybody in St. Gildas knew Eve Terrick wore in his sabbats. I was perfectly satisfied, and when 3 hours later a horse shouting from the Banalek Road brought me to the window, I was not surprised to see Eve Terrick, bloody, disheveled, hatless, with his strong arms bound behind him, walking with bent head between two mounted gendarmes. The crowd around him swelled every minute, crying, "Parasite, parasite, death to the murderer." As he passed my window, I saw great clots of mud on his dusty sabbaths, from the heels of which projected wisps of red wheat straw. Then I walked back into the Red Admiral's study, determined to find what the microscope would show on the wheat straws. I examined each one very carefully, and then, my eyes aching, I rested my chin on my hand and leaned back in the chair. I had not been as fortunate as some detectives, for there was no evidence that the straws had ever been used in a sabot at all. Furthermore, directly across the hallway stood a carved Breton chest, and now I noticed, for the first time, that from beneath the closed lid, dachshunds of similar red wheat straws projected, bent exactly as mine were bent by the weight of the lid. I yawned in disgust. It was apparent that I was not cut out for a detective, and I bitterly pondered over the difference between clues in real life and clues in a detective story. After a while, I rose, walked over to the chest, and opened the lid. The interior was wadded with the red wheat straws, and on this wadding lay 2 curious glass jars, 2 or 3 small vials, several empty bottles, labeled chloroform, a collecting jar of cyanide of potassium, and a book. In a farther corner of the chest were some letters bearing English stamps, and also the torn coverings of 2 parcels, all from England, and all directed to the Red Admiral under his proper name of Sir Louis Zantarex Saint-Gildas Parmouy La Finisterre. All these traps are carried over to the desk, shut the lid of the chest, and sat down to read the letters. They were written in commercial bad French, evidently by an Englishman. Freely translated, the contents of the first letter were as follows: London, June 12th, 1894. Dear Monsieur Sick, your kind favor of the 19th instrument received and contents noted. The latest work on the Lepidopter of England is Blozer's How to Catch British Butterflies with Notes and Tables and an Introduction, by Sir Thomas Sniffer. The price of this work in 1 volume calf is 5 or 125 francs of French money. A post office order will receive our prompt attention. We beg to remain yours. Fradley and Tuma, 470 Egan Square, London, SW. The next letter was even less interesting. It merely stated that the money had been received and the book would be forwarded. The third engaged my attention, and I shall quote it, the translation being a free one. Dear Sir, your letter of the 1st of July was duly received, and we at once referred to Mr. Fradley himself. Mr. Fradley, being much interested in your question, sent your letter to Professor Schweinery of the Berlin Entomological Society, whose note Blozer refers to in page 630 in his How to Catch British Butterflies. We have just received an answer from Professor Schweinery, which we translate into French. See enclosed slip. Professor Schweinery begs to present to you 2 jars of Scythil prepared under his own town, a supervision. We forward the same to you, trusting that you will find everything satisfactory. You remain yours, etc., Fradley and Tuma. The enclosed slip read as follows: Messrs. Feedley and Tuma. Gentlemen, Scythiline, a complex hydrocarbon, was first used by Professor Schnoid of Antwerp a year ago. I discovered an analogous formula about the same time, and named it Cethil. I have used it with great success everywhere. It is as certain as a magnet. I beg to present you 3 small jars, and would be pleased to have you forward 2 of them to your correspondent in St. Gilder's with my compliments. Blozer's quotation of me on page 630 of his glorious work, How to Catch British Butterflies, is correct. Yours, etc., Heinrich Schweinery, Ph.D. S. When I had finished this letter, I folded it up and put it into my pocket with the others. Then I opened Blozer's valuable work, How to Catch British Butterflies, and turned to page 630. Now, although the Red Admiral could only have acquired the book very recently, and although all the other pages were perfectly clean, this particular page was thumbed black and heavy. Pencil marks enclosed a paragraph at the bottom of the page. This is the paragraph. Professor Schweinery says, of the 2 old methods used by collectors for the capture of the swift-winged high-flying Apatura iris or purple emperor, the first, which was using a long-handled net, proved successful once in 1,000 times, and the second, the placing of bait upon the ground, such as decayed meat, dead cats, rats, etc., was not only disagreeable, even for an enthusiastic collector, but also very uncertain. Once in 500 times would the splendid butterfly leave the tops of his favorite oak trees to circle about the fetid bait offered. I have found Scythil a perfectly sure bait to draw this beautiful butterfly to the ground where it can be easily captured. An ounce of Scythil placed in a yellow saucer under an oak tree will draw to it every Apatura iris within a radius of 20 miles. So if any collector who possesses a little Scythil, even though it be in a sealed bottle in his pocket, if such a collector does not find a single Apatura iris fluttering close about him within an hour, let him be satisfied that the Apatura iris does not inhabit his country. When I had finished reading this note, I sat for a long while thinking hard. Then I examined the 2 jars. They were labeled Scythli. One was full, the other nearly full. The rest must be on the corpse of the Red Admiral, I thought, no matter if it is in a corked bottle. I took all the things back to the chest, laid them carefully on the straw, and closed the lid. The gendarme sentinel at the gate saluted me respectfully as I crossed over to the Groy Inn. The inn was surrounded by an excited crowd, and the hallway was choked with gendarmes and peasants. On every side they greeted me cordially, announcing that the real murderer was caught, but I pushed by them without a word and ran upstairs to find Lise. She opened her door when I knocked and threw both arms about my neck. I took her to my breast and kissed her. After a moment I asked her if she would obey me no matter what I commanded, and she said she would with a proud humility that touched me. Then go at once to a vet in San Julian, I said. Ask her to harness the dog cart and drive you to the convent in Campal. Wait for me there. Will you do this without questioning me, my darling? She raised her face to mine. Kiss me, she said innocently. The next moment she had vanished. I walked deliberately into the Purple Emperor's room and peered into the gauze-covered box, which had held the chrysalis of Apatura iris. It was as I expected. The chrysalis was empty and transparent, and a great crack ran down the middle of its back. But on the netting, inside the box, a magnificent butterfly slowly waved its burnished purple wings. For the locked chrysalis had given up its silent tenant, the butterfly symbol of immortality. Then a great fear fell upon me. I know now that it was the fear of the Black Priest, but neither then nor for years after did I know that the Black Priest had ever lived on earth. As I bent over the box, I heard a confused murmur outside the house, which ended in a furious shout of parricide, and I heard the gendarmes ride away behind a wagon which rattled sharply on the flinty highway. I went to the window. In the wagon sat Yves Terech, bound and wild-eyed, 2 gendarmes at either side of him, and all around the wagon rode mounted gendarmes whose bare sabers scarcely kept the crowd away. Parricide, they howled, "Let him die!" I stepped back and opened the gauze-covered box. Very gently but firmly I took the splendid butterfly by its closed 4 wings and lifted it unharmed between my thumb and forefinger. Then, holding it concealed behind my back, I went down into the café. Of all the crowd that had filled it, shouting for the death of Yves Terech, only 3 persons remained seated in front of the huge empty fireplace. They were the brigadier, Durand, Max Fortar, the chemist of Kimpol, and the Purple Emperor. The latter looked abashed when I entered, but I paid no attention to him and walked straight to the chemist. "Monsieur Fortar," I said, "do you know much about hydrocarbons? They are my specialty." He said, astonished, "Have you ever heard of such a thing as tethol?" "Schwinnery's tethol? Oh, yes, we use it in perfumery." "Good," I said. "Has it an odor?" "No, and yes. One is always aware of its presence, but really nobody can affirm it has an odor. It is curious." He continued looking at me. "It is very curious you should have asked me that, for all day I have been imagining I detected the presence of Scythil. "Do you imagine so now?" I asked. "Yes, more than ever." I sprang to the front door and tossed out the butterfly. The splendid creature beat the air for a moment, flitted uncertainly hither and thither, and then, to my astonishment, sailed majestically back into the cafe and alighted on the hearth. For a moment I was nonplussed, but when my eyes rested on the Purple Emperor, I comprehended. In a flash, "Lift that hearthstone," I cried to the Brigadier Durant. "Pry it up with your car." Scabbard, the Purple Emperor suddenly fell forward in his chair, his face ghastly white, his jaw loose with terror. "What is Scythiel?" I shouted, seizing him by the arm, but he plunged heavily from his chair, face downward on the floor, and at the same moment a cry from the chemist made me turn. There stood the Brigadier Durant, one hand supporting the hearthstone, one hand raised in horror. There stood Max Fortin, the chemist, rigid with excitement, and below in the hollow bed where the hearthstone had rested lay a crushed mass of bleeding human flesh from the midst of which stared a cheap glass eye. I seized the Purple Emperor and dragged him to his feet. "Look," I cried, "look at your old friend, the Red Admiral." But he only smiled in a vacant way and rolled his head, muttering, "Bait for it. Butterflies, Scythiel? Oh, no, 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 you can't do it, Admiral. You see, I alone own the Purple Emperor. I alone am the Purple Emperor. And the same carriage that bore me to Kimperley to claim my bride carried him to Kimper, gagged and bound, a foaming, howling lunatic.